A short while ago, I posted a video review on Power Rangers Time Force for Game Boy Advance. It was crap! Today we're going to be looking at the follow-up to that game, Power Rangers Wild Force for Game Boy Advance, based on the 2002 incarnation of the long-running franchise, which pitted the Wild Force Rangers against their arch-nemesis, the Master Org. Absolutely riveting stuff. Let's get into it. Now, past 2D video games based on the Power Rangers franchise have done different things. Either side-scrolling platformers, or one-on-one fighting games, or side-scrolling beat-em-ups, or just plain crap. Power Rangers Wild Force takes a different turn and places the action in an overhead isometric playing field. It's still very much a beat-em-up with lots of button mashing, but it's also slightly more than that. You see, prior to each level, you get to choose which ranger you get to play as, with varying strengths and weaknesses. Also, unique weapons for each Power Ranger. Yeah, you hear that, Time Force for Game Boy Advance? This is how you do it! Once you pick out a ranger to control, you then have to pick 3 ally rangers that will stand in reserve to perform team-based attacks that will wipe out enemies faster or deliver more damage to bosses. Now, each ranger pairing performs a different team attack, whether it be a projectile shot, a tackle maneuver, or a human torpedo. This is a nice idea that's well executed for the most part, as it adds a bit of depth to a normally shallow gameplay and gives you more diverse attack options. Mashing the A button to perform attacks might do fine against the grunts, but with the bosses you need to make use of your abilities and use them wisely, as they do cost energy to use. Even though energy regenerates slowly and there are usually pickups to refill your bar, but still, the thought is there. Control in Wild Force is actually not that bad. They did flip the buttons around in a sense, so A button attacks while B button jumps, which is an annoyance when you're playing a side-scrolling platformer, but not so much here, strangely enough. Perhaps this has something to do with the fact that jumping really serves very little purpose other than to reach some higher platform for an item in the corner or something. Would have been nice if there were some air attacks to accompany this jumping ability, but I guess I should be thankful that I could jump at all. You hear that? Lightspeed Rescue on Nintendo 64? I can jump on this. And the Game Boy Advance has fewer buttons than the N64 controller. And is lacking an analog stick, but I digress. Zord battles are also a different beast in Wild Force. It's still one-on-one, but your movement is pretty limited as your Zord lacks the ability to jump and moves a bit more sluggish, at least at first. However, you can block attacks and you also have an additional attack. Every so often when the yellow meter is filled, the game will force you into a series of quick-time button sequences that will have different consequences. Sometimes, however, the game won't register a button press and you'll be penalized as a result through no fault of your own, but it's not a common occurrence. Despite the limited mobility, the Zord fights are handled quite nicely here, as it feels like you're controlling a heavy machine and not just another fighter. And the bosses do have some varied attacks at times, so it doesn't constantly feel like the same thing over and over, which was an issue with the Time Force offering on Game Boy Advance. As you progress through the game and clear levels, you'll earn crystals that will give you access to different weapons for your Zords, or even different Zord configurations, which is a nice touch, gives you a little more variety in the Zord fights. Between levels, you're shown this map which displays where you're at. There's a couple forks in the road where you'll be able to pick which path you get to go through, tackling either one set of levels or the other. The two paths will simply join together after a couple levels, but still it's a nice touch, and it does add some replay value to Wild Force. For what it's worth, Power Rangers Wild Force sports slightly better visuals than its Time Force predecessor. Time Force had this weird semi-photorealistic CGI-ish pixelated graphical theme that looked like crap. Sorry to say. Whereas Wild Force boasts nicely rendered sprite work and level layouts that is much more pleasing to the eyes. The characters look pretty small but are still plainly visible, and possessing some detail. Cutscenes aren't any better, however. They still have these CG rendered original monsters rather than creations from the show. They look pretty awful, at least in the cutscenes. But at least there's the perennial Wild Force baddies such as Gindrax, Toxica, and finally the Master Org in his strongest form. Music in Wild Force is nothing special, somewhat better than Time Force's meager audio offerings and tolerable to a point, but nothing particularly memorable. Strangely enough, there's no semblance of the Wild Force theme song in this game, which is rather strange. Sound in general is alright, it's there, nothing major or groundbreaking or anything special, it's just there. There's also multiplayer support in this game, so you can frankly give it a shot and join in on the fun. Haven't tried this mode, however, so I don't know how good it's handled. But should be fun. THQ's offerings of Power Ranger games have been pretty lackluster from the few games that I've played thus far. My past reviews on 2 games from this period have pretty much made that clear. However, Power Rangers Wild Force is actually enjoyable as it is a change from what has come before. An overhead beat 'em up with a rather unique isometric perspective, unique for Power Rangers that is, limited open-ended exploration, and team-based attacks that haven't been seen in prior Ranger games or even later games. Sure, it's still repetitive button mashing to a point, but it's a bit different at least. And perhaps it's because of this unorthodox approach to Power Rangers gaming that makes Wild Force stand out from the rest of the pack. Really, this could have been another Time Force on GBA, but it isn't. It's better than that, and it's actually one of the best Power Rangers games out there. That's a pretty bold claim considering this isn't from the more memorable and prosperous Mighty Morphin Age. But I think Wild Force has a good claim to that notion. Overall, if you're into Power Rangers and you're looking for a good game on the go, consider Power Rangers Wild Force on the Game Boy Advance. It's actually pretty fun and pretty good.